air was thick with the scent of the coming rain. Lightning flashed in the dark clouds and thunder rumbled through the belly of the earth. The Turk and his 200 men celebrated a productive day of pillaging and looting. A woman screamed from where she was being violated by a group of the animals. So full were they with their gain that they didn't see the lone figure that stood there in their midst, blending in with the night. His duster and long brown dreads blew slightly in the breeze. His hand hung to his side, and in his palm was the handle of his heavy sword, the tip of which rested in the dirt at his feet. Thunder rumbled the earth, and just for a moment, the Turk and his men paused in their celebration, their senses telling them that something was off with the night. All 200 of them, like a doe that had just caught the scent of a predator, looked around, squinting, trying to see what was it about the darkness that suddenly felt wrong. Lightning flashed, highlighting the silhouette of the dark figure that stood amongst them. The lightning caused the steel of his sword to appear blue. There was a second where everything seemed to stand still, as each one of them battled with their own minds on whether or not their eyes were seeing the man standing there, holding his sword as if at rest. The calm before the storm. But with the next breath, they all scrambled into action, reaching for their weapons, charging toward the stranger, who just stood there with his head bowed. Lightning flashed, and with it his head snapped up, but it appeared as if the lightning was now in his eyes. They all skidded to a stop, threatening by the power that now radiated from this man like sonic booms. It was evident that at this point, many wanted to turn back and flee. But right then, the Turk became possessed with another power, a lesser power, but one that was filled with enough hate to want to see the light extinguished forever. He held his head back. "Kill him!" he bellowed. The rage and hate he felt almost as ancient as the light that came from the man's eyes. The skies opened and the rain began to fall. "Kill him! He's only one man," the Turk yelled, giving his men the courage they lacked just a minute ago. That one man didn't move until the first brave fool had reached him. He brought his sword up, severing the head from his body in one slice. There was a pause as the other men stared down at their fallen comrade that no longer had a head. When they looked back up to the brown-haired man that stared at them with eyes that saw but did not, they all thought better of it. Unbeknown to them, a swarm of beings that could not be seen with the naked eye flew into the camp and took up residency in the vessels that are the Turks' men. Each of the men's bodies were invaded with legions of demons. The goal to destroy this power that was standing in their way, this power that was always standing in their way. The men with renewed strength charged at the brown-haired man all at once. Simon wiped the rain out of his eyes. He couldn't possibly be seeing what it looked like he was seeing. Dawid was not human. He had never seen anything like this. The bright light that shone from his eyes was some kind of power. He watched as Dawid began to cause bodies to drop, one after the other. Bill had been the best swordsman Simon had ever seen. The things he could do with his Bushido blades was past amazing. However, the way that Dawid worked his sword made Bill's skills look like child's play. Somehow, he was managing to cut down man after man that came his way, while using the sword to block bullets that were being fired at him. Science stumbled to his feet from where he had been crouching down behind a bush. Dee had to see this with her own eyes. She would never believe him if he tried to explain this to her. Quickly, he made his way back to his bike.
I sat straight up in the bed, the sound of the soft whistle penetrating my sleep.
I had been trained to listen for that whistle. I never slept too hard that I couldn't hear it, not even when sleeping off drunkenness. I clutched my head. Ah, damn, whiskey. The whistle came again. Simon stood at my door. When I looked at him, he jerked his head, telling me to come with him before he disappeared down the hall. Quickly, I got out of the bed that I don't even remember getting in. I was still fully dressed, including my boots. I looked back at the bed. Yafa must be with my bell. Damn, this is why I hated drinking. I grabbed my coat and I followed behind Simon. By the time I got to my bike, Simon was already gone. Quickly, I mounted up and followed the sound of his engine. I frowned, seeing he was headed toward the Turks' camp. What the hell was he about? He stopped his bike next to... My goodness, was that Dawid's bike? I parked mine and jumped off. What the hell is going on here? I asked. It sounded like World War III was happening on the other side of those trees. He gestured for me to follow him. I did. He squatted down behind a boulder. Frowning, I followed. Then he pointed into the camp. I turned to look and, oh shh! I wiped the rain out of my eyes. What the hell? Dawid. Oh my goodness, Dawid was not human. A bright light shot from his eyes, and he was using his sword to wreak havoc. Dismembered bodies lay sprawled out on the ground everywhere. He moved with such deadly precision. There was no way a human can move like that. There was no way a human can work a sword like that. Lightning flashed, and I put my hand to my mouth to keep from screaming. Next to Dawid, right next to him, was some kind of being that could only be seen when the lightning flashed. He was huge like Dawid, muscled, very powerful, and that bright light that came from his eyes came from that being's eyes as well. Lightning flashed again, and I saw that he moved just like Dawid. It was as if they were one being. Every move they made was on one accord. He was slaying beings that we could not see, while Dawid slayed the flesh. How many men do you see? I asked Simon, not able to look away from what I was witnessing. One, he said, only Dawid. Lightning flashed, and both Dawid and the being leaped in the air and brought their sword down on one of the big ugly goons, severing his body in half from neck to waist. In the lightning, how many do you see? I yelled. I had to know it wasn't just me. Only one, Dawid, Simon repeated. My hands shook. Oh God, what was I seeing? My mind called my eyes a liar the whole time. Dawid was destroying the whole camp. Not many men were still standing. Quickly he took care of them as if they were nothing. He looked up at the Turk, who, like the coward he was, had let all his men die first. Dawid sent his sword back into the chest of the last man standing outside of the Turk as he charged him from behind, without even looking away from the Turk, who reached down and picked up some kind of homemade machine gun. He wore a wicked grin on his face before he pulled the trigger and let the bullets rip. Dawid walked towards him with a steady gait, his sword flashing blue in the night as his powerful arms sliced the sword around his body, blocking bullets as if it was an umbrella and the bullets was raining. What the world? That was impossible. It was impossible to move a sword like that. Something was off about the Turk as well. I know him to be a coward that was only tough when he was surrounded by his lackeys. Why wasn't he running? Everyone, and I do mean every one of his men, lay dead on the ground. When his gun was empty, he threw it at Dawid, who moved to the side, dodging it, and in the blink of an eye, he turned his body, raising his sword in the air. And when he brought that sword down, the Turk's head went with it. Time seemed to slow. As for just a moment, Dawid stood there, his deadly sword pointing toward the earth, where it dripped the blood from his victims into the ground. The earth shook as thunder roared. Lightning flashed, and I saw that the being stood next to him. He too, looking down. His sword held the same way. It was as if, it's as if they were one person. Then suddenly Dawid turned towards us, the bright light from his eyes flashing over us. My knees gave out as he walked towards us, still holding that sword in his hand. And for the first time in a long time, I was crippled with fear. I scooted back on the ground, my feet slipping in the wet ground. Although I couldn't look away from Dawid, I sensed that Simon too backed away from him, much like I was doing now. When he was a short distance from us, he squatted down, and without looking away from us, I think he was looking at us, he wiped his sword through the grass. One swipe one way, then one swipe the other way. He stood and slid it through a sheath he wore on his back. My body was paralyzed in fear as he approached us. He was no longer looking at us, but straight ahead, and it was strange because it was like he didn't even know us. When he got to where we sat on the ground, he looked down at us, the bright light coming from his eyes too much for either of us to bear. Lightning flashed, and I saw that the being was right next to him, and he too looked down at us as they passed. When Dawid looked away, so did it. He passed us without even speaking, as if he was there but wasn't. And without saying a word, he got on his bike and rode away toward the compound. Still sprawled in the wet grass, I slowly turned to look at Simon, who was also sprawled in the grass, looking toward the direction Dawid had just rode. When he turned to look at me, a thought struck us both at the same time. Whatever Dawid was, it was headed back toward the compound. Quickly, we both got to our feet. I couldn't help it. I had to stop and give one more glance at the slaughtered camp. A naked woman that was covered in blood sobbed from where she lay huddled on the ground, surrounded by dismembered bodies, her eyes letting me know that it would be a while before she got over what she had seen here tonight. We ran to our bikes and followed him. He was moving fast. I thought my bike was fast, but it had nothing on his. We couldn't see him. It was too dark, only the light that came from his eyes. However, that light dimmed and then disappeared shortly after that. I looked at Simon. He shrugged, shaking his head. Neither of us could make any sense of this. I told myself that everything was going to be okay. It didn't seem that Dawid would kill innocent people. After all, he hadn't touched the poor traumatized woman in the camp. When we got to the gate, it was still up. We rolled our bikes under and I signaled for it to be lowered. Dawid's bike sat right outside the storage building door. I parked mine next to it and I ran inside. The lobby was quiet. It was still very early in the morning and only the extremely early risers were just now starting to stir. "Where do you think he went?" Simon said, coming in next to me. "The loft." We ran up the stairs. The loft door was wide open. His duster was on the floor just inside the door. His bloody sword lay across my little kitchen table. We looked toward the bed, and sure enough, his big body was sprawled across it. And he was out. I stared down at him, at a loss for what to do next. He still had on all his clothes that had been covered in splattered blood. Good thing I had a change of sheets, because I was going to have to burn these. I looked up at Simon, who stood next to me looking down at him. "What do you think?" I asked quietly. He shrugged. "We ain't going to get no answers from him tonight. Let him sleep." He turned to head for the door. "Simon," I whispered, following him. He stopped and turned to look at me. You just gonna leave me here with him?" He chuckled. "He slept here every other night. What's the difference?" He turned to walk away. I was so distraught I grabbed his arm. I quickly let it go though. "What's the difference?" I whispered. "Did you just not see what I saw?" "I'll tell you what's the difference. He's obviously some kind of alien warrior from another world or something. Well, if he is, he was one yesterday and the day before that. And he slept here and he didn't kill you, so I think you'll be okay. He patted my shoulder. I closed my eyes as the pain from his touch shot through me. I grinded down on my teeth. When I opened my eyes, I growled at him. Fine. Leave me here to handle the alien by myself. He nodded. That's a sport. And then he was gone, closing the door behind him. Simon! Simon! I whispered. He didn't come back. I stood there facing the door, not sure what to do. Slowly I turned and looked at his big body sprawled out in my bed. I exhaled. I always had to do the hard jobs, the dirty work, like clean up this bloody mess he left. I picked his dust up and I hung it up. Then I cleaned his sword and my table. When I was done with that, I made my way to the bed. Dawid, I whispered, not sure if I really wanted to wake him. He stirred. He mumbled in his sleep. Surprised that he could hear me, I stared down at him with wide eyes. We have to get you cleaned up. Forget it. I was out here now, might as well go for it. He cracked his eyes open, and I braced myself for that bright light, but exhaled in relief because it was his regular eyes that looked back at me. He smiled slightly, in an adorable, sleepy way. Can you help me get you cleaned up? I asked. Sure, beauty, he muttered, sleepily, although he didn't move. I unlaced one of his boots, and I took it off and then the other. I stood pondering on the best way to do this. Okay, I went into the bathroom and I ran a bath first. When I came back, he was good and asleep again. Dawid, I whispered. He stirred, cracking his eyes again. Come on, I ran you a bath. I pulled at his big shoulders. He wasn't budging. Damn, he was heavy. Dawid, I need your help, I whispered. He groaned and then slowly sat up in the bed. I took advantage of that. Coming to my knees next to him, I grabbed the bottom of his thermal shirt and I lifted it. Oh my. I sucked in my breath as it rose over his six-pack. Ooh, oh man. My breath got caught somewhere in my throat. He watched me from under lowered lids, and a little smile spread on his lips. It was as if he knew what I was thinking, or something. He held up his arms and I lifted the shirt over his muscled pecs. My hands were shaking at this point. Damn it, I even think I was sweating. I lifted the shirt over his head and arms, and my, what big arms they were. I cleared my throat. Okay, come on, we're almost done. I helped him stand. He was really weak. I put his arm around my shoulder. What happened? I asked as we slowly made our way to the bathroom. Did your superpowers drain you, Superman? He chuckled weakly and held on to the sink as I undid his pants. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and quickly helped him out of the rest of his clothes. I know this made me look a little skittish, like a little girl, but his body was working havoc on me. I'm serious. He eased into the hot bath and sighed. Yeah, beauty. Oh, yeah, that feels good, he said. Moments later, he was out again. I took advantage of this time and quickly changed the sheets on the bed. I put them and his soiled clothes in a bag. I will wash them tomorrow. When I was done with that, I went back into the bathroom and washed as much of him as I could. I got him to stand and quickly wrapped a big towel around his waist and used another one to dry him off. Then, with his help, we got him back to the bed. He was asleep before I could even cover him with the covers. I exhaled. Wow. Just wow. The sun was beginning to rise in the sky. I know there was not a chance I was going to get back to sleep, so I jumped into the shower instead, washing away my hangover. It's official. I am never drinking again. I tried to convince myself that maybe I was still tipsy, and the majority of what I had witnessed was due to the whiskey. But I had never been good at lying to myself. There was no amount of whiskey in the world that could make me see what I had seen last night. When I was done with my shower, I moisturized my skin and wrapped my big purple scarf around me in my warrior princess style. Dawid had taken my guns, but I still had my knives. I strapped my blade to my thigh underneath my scarf. Once I finished in the bathroom, I went back to check on him. He hadn't budged. So, okay, I guess he was just gonna sleep it off. I left to go find Yafa. If she was a little alien baby, it was too late. I didn't care. I already loved her. She and I had breakfast with my belle before we left so that I could do my rounds. When I got outside, there was a big commotion at the gate. "What's going on?" I asked as I approached, looking up at Eugene and Baxter, who was standing on the watchtower addressing my people. "A guy came from town today. He says that the Turk and all his men are dead. He says that the blood fiends are over there as we speak, feasting on their bodies," Eugene called down to me. Chaos erupted as everybody started talking at once. I held up my hand and they all fell silent. "Relax. There is no need to panic. They obviously were attacked by a group of blood fiends." Baxter shook his head. No. According to the locals, their bodies had been cut apart as if they had been attacked by some kind of army." The crowd erupted in worried chaos again. "Oh no, what if they come here next?" Maggie cried. "Our gates can't hold back an army that size," Mr. Kimball cried. All my people nodded their heads in agreement. However, we were surrounded by Dawid's people, and none of them were panicked. In fact, they all just stood to the side. Some of them outside their tents, some of them in, and just watched us. "Wait!" Baxter yelled down at the people, who fell silent to hear what he had to say next. I found Simon's eyes over the crowd. I was going to have to tell my people the truth, and judging from the look on Dawid's people's face, they already knew what happened to the Turks' camp. "That's not all," Baxter said. "The guy says a girl stumbled into town naked, covered in blood," he yelled. "She said it was one man who did it, not an army. One man with a sword. She said a bright light came from his eyes. She also said he had brown dreadlocks." I closed my eyes as everyone fell silent. The sound of a pin dropping could be heard. Damn. How did I even begin to explain what I didn't even understand myself? "And there is only one man around here with brown dreadlocks," Baxter spat. He looked down at me with a sneer on his weasel face. Boy, he better be lucky Dawid took my guns, 'cause I promise I would have shot him down right off the tower walls. "Only one man. The same man D has been telling us to trust." He pointed down at me, and everybody turned to look at me, even my belle. "Who is this man you let in here?" he yelled. "I let in here?" I asked him, getting angry. "What the hell? Am I remembering it wrong? Did he not invade our walls? He told me, just like he told each of you, what was going to be. I have about as much power as any of you." Baxter opened his mouth to say something else, but he never got a chance because right then the big metal gate began to rise. Baxter and Eugene looked at each other confused. You see, the only level to the gate was up there in the tower, and neither one of them was pushing it. The gate continued to rise by itself. Everybody went silent, even Dawid's men and his people. We all stared, stunned at the gate as it rose. Standing on the other side of it was a big, dark man. He wore a long duster much like Dawid's, but where Dawid's was a light brown, this man's duster was black. On his head was a black cowboy hat that sat low, so low that it shadowed the whole top of the man's face, leaving only his chin and strong neck to show. He wore his long hair in long cornrows that fell down his back. On his feet were a pair of cowboy boots. When the gate had come to a stop, he slowly walked through it. We all just stared, not sure what to make of him. As he walked, the wind blew his duster, and I could see that he, like Dawid, carried a sword at his waist. He took us all in as he continued through the gate, heading towards me. My belle, take the baby," I said, without taking my eyes from this new stranger. I handed her Yafa. He stopped a few feet in front of me, and like Dawid, power oozed from him. He touched the front of his hat.
"Shalom, Bot."
His voice was unbelievably deep.
"They call me the preacher."